All right. Hello and welcome. My name is Jeff with 15 Minutes of Fame. 15 Minutes of Fame is an online interview music review network. 15 Minutes of Fame. We review singles, EPs, LPs of independent recording artists. Today we'll be speaking with one of those artists, Han. Han is a recording artist located in New York, but originally from California, and he is here to discuss his most recent release, Tales of a Failed Altruist. Han, I would like to welcome you and thank you so much for agreeing to do this.
Thank you, Jeff. It's great to be here.
Excellent. So, if you don't mind, I'm going to kind of go ahead and get right into some of the questions here.
Yeah, of
First one I
course.
have for you here. So, music is nothing if not emotional, and your
hmm
album Tales of a Failed Altruist discusses many things that can get quite emotional.
hmm
Walk us through what it was like to write these songs, to record and perform them, and then finally, once you got to hear that product of this conceived experience that you had.
hmm Yeah, of course. I think for me, what was at the forefront of my mind during the process was the all of this built up trauma and baggage that has accumulated throughout my teenage years and into early adulthood. I dealt with a lot of things growing up with a difficult home life, and then I developed ways to cope with that were not necessarily healthy, and I ended up doing a lot of things that I regret very much. And so I always knew that I wanted to be able to be brave enough to face those issues and be really upfront about them and come out in the open and be like, this is what I did and it wasn't okay. And so when I was writing these songs, it was definitely very scary because in my previous work, I had mostly just focused on love and heartbreak and relationships and things that are maybe a little bit more universal. Whereas this album felt very much like my story and it felt very personal to me and kind of intimate in that way. And so
Mhm.
it was difficult in a lot of ways, and it was a new experience, like trying to write these songs and convey my story in a way where it was going to come across, but also not feel like I was trying to spin it one way or the other. I just wanted to present the facts and not romanticize or make it more sympathetic than it needed to be. Just lay everything out there and let the listener decide for themselves the interpretation they wanted to have of whether it was right or not. Um, but then we got to the point where the album was starting to be finished, and during the last month to the run up, I started to have like I started to get really nervous over having to actually release the songs out into the world and see the response and perform them in front of people. We did the album release show and we did a listening party and we did a bunch of things that got really great crowd response, but before it was so nerve-wracking to have to be vulnerable in that way. But
Sure. Yeah.
I think all things considered, it went really well. Like a lot of people have reached out with different interpretations of what they took away from the work, and so some people have been like, yeah, you were a kid, the things that you did were not necessarily your fault. Other people have been like, maybe those things weren't okay, but it's good to recognize that and move forward. And then other people have been like, yeah, there are some things in this album that are kind of fucked up, and I'm like, that's okay. Like I welcome all of the interpretations, and I'm just glad that people are ultimately, at the end of the day, I'm just glad people are resonating with the story and taking away whatever they want to take away from it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think I know a couple of the things that you're speaking of.
hmm
I mean, right from the get-go, you're pretty forward about what you're discussing within the entire album. You
Yeah.
don't really there's no filter on anything that you're discussing, and it's definitely a far cry from what we hear in the norms of mainstream music. Are
hmm
the love stories, or just like the life is great or life is
Yeah.
not so great, but
hmm
there's nothing elaborate to what they're saying. It's just uh, generalized messaging.
Yeah.
And so speaking about some of those more tense issues, you actually have kind of discussed, uh, and you kind of touched on this a little bit on a general basis, but you've discussed having like kind of a tense relationship with friends from California and
Yeah.
your parents and
hmm
things like that. Um, and it's my understanding right now you're still not really speaking to your parents all that much.
Yep, that's correct.
Uh, do you know if they listen to your music at all? And do you think that it's helpful to have this kind of um, this out there for people like your parents and people like friends, maybe who you don't speak to very much anymore, to
Mhm.
have kind of a resource to better understand you and what you're going through then?
That's an interesting question, and it was definitely something that was on my mind a lot during the writing process for the album because I wanted to make sure that I was telling this story for the right reason. You know, I didn't want to
Yeah,
tell this story to explicitly seek forgiveness or like try and attain like some cosmic sense of atonement or whatever for like to like kind of like undo or like atone for the sins of my past. I think part of the narrative arc of the album is like me coming to terms with that and being like the past is the past. It can't be undone. I made a lot of mistakes, but maybe instead of looking back, the only way to move on is to look forward and do better tomorrow. And so I think when it comes to like sometimes I do think about whether people from back home who knew me then are listening to this album, if they have any thoughts on it. But I try not to concern myself with that because I know that at the end of the day, like I am not owed forgiveness from any of those people. I do not expect it. If one of those people were to stumble across this album in their own time and listen to it and say, "You know what, Alex, I forgive you," then that's great, but I'm not seeking that necessarily. And there may be just as many people who listen to the album and go, "Actually, no, what you did when we were in high school together was still kind of fucked up." And that's also okay.
yeah,
I at the end of the day, it's I wanted to make this for me and for anyone that might have related to what I was going through at the time. But it is not a means to seek forgiveness or to seek
sure.
understanding from
Yeah,
anyone that may have been present at the time, including my parents. So, does that
yeah,
answer your question?
yeah, absolutely. It's a great answer. And I was kind of where I thought you might go with it as well too, because the fact of the matter is, most humans, one of the most unfortunate human experiences that I think everybody has is trauma,
Hmm.
and we all cope with it in different ways.
Yeah.
And it doesn't make it right, it doesn't make it wrong, it just makes it a human experience.
Hmm.
And it's our job to figure out how we get closure from that. Closure
Hmm.
doesn't necessarily mean forgiveness. It could
Yes,
mean just turning a page
hmm,
for everybody involved. It could
of
mean
course.
forgiveness for one person and not for another.
Yeah.
I used to be very religious, and now I'm absolutely not. And
Hmm.
one of the things that I had to um, get a full understanding of was redefining forgiveness
Yeah.
and knowing that nobody is obligated to forgive or to receive forgiveness. That's not a requirement
Exactly.
for
Yeah.
people. So I really love your answer because you're addressing the fact that uh, you hope that there is a closure about this, but it doesn't necessarily mean there has to be forgiveness for it. And I just think that's actually profound, a profound thought. So
Hmm.
thank you, and thank you very much for sharing that. I know I've personally experienced trauma in my life. I know some, and I'm not as capable of being open about it. So it's refreshing and empowering to hear somebody else be able to talk about it. So thank you. Um,
Well, thanks, Jeff. That
so
means a
if we
lot.
can actually kind of get into a little bit of about some of that with regards to what's in the album.
Hmm.
I just wanted to kind of talk about some things. So the beginning of the album is definitely it's an attention grabber.
Hmm.
Here's the first thing you should know. That very first song,
Hmm.
the first chorus. You have in the lines of the first chorus. If I can pull it up here. The first thing you should know about me is I almost died at the end of the rope. Second
Hmm.
thing you should know about me is I'm still fighting, trying to find a way to cope.
Hmm.
And to me, that sounds like a person who's going through the process of recovery. Like somebody who's saying like, um, I I had suicidal tendencies. I wanted to hurt myself, and
Right.
I'm doing the work now, but there are moments in my life where I want to retreat back to that. But now that I'm empowered with my recovery process, I'm able to combat that a little bit.
Yeah.
If I'm getting that interpretation correctly, if you wouldn't mind kind of speaking to maybe what you were trying to say with here's the first thing you should know.
hmm Yeah, totally. I think like your interpretation is pretty on the nose. I think what was at the forefront of my mind during that song was I wrote it when I had just been through like a pretty major breakup. And so it kind of started as like a love song, but then it became something else because I was like basically in the aftermath of that breakup, it was the first like really, really, really serious, like really bad breakup that I had ever been through in my life. And that was a new feeling for me. And I had kind of fooled myself at that point. Like this was around like a year and some change ago, but I had more or less fooled myself into thinking that I was okay. Cause I had my suicidal episode when I was 15. I am 24 now. It's been a long time since then. It's been almost a decade. And I guess I had gotten to the point where I was like, oh, I'm fine. Those demons are in the past. I don't need to think about them anymore. It was a different me. Like, I don't need to still be dealing with those things. But then this breakup happened, and all of a sudden, I just completely fell off a cliff. Mental health, like, went into the toilet. I was dealing with so much stuff and coping with it in really unhealthy ways. And, like, I kind of had to come to terms with the fact that, like, oh, no, there's still old damage. Like, there is still old
Sure.
baggage here that I have not fully reckoned with yet. And maybe going into this relationship, what I should have said was, hey, if you're going to get close to me, there's some things that you should know about.
Yeah.
Because that was not something I said to this person. And who knows, like the past is the past. Like we'll never know what might have been. And, you know, that's another part of the human condition is to always wonder, like, oh, what if I'd made this choice differently? But part of me was thinking in that moment that like maybe there should be like a proverbial warning sign over my head. Like maybe there should be some form of warning that like, hey, like you're going to get close to me and I am not entirely mentally stable. There are some things that I still need to work through. And so that was where my headspace was at. And it was an attempt to just like address that and get out in front of it and just be really open about it. And then I think like it wasn't that long after I had written the track where I was like, this has to be the opener to the album. Because I think
Yeah.
this is the introduction to me and who I am, and you know maybe the introduction should be like, hey, I tried to kill myself, and
Yeah.
maybe that is the first thing that people should know.
Yeah, and it was such a profound opening too, because it's just like right out the gate, you you earn the trust of the listener, and you do it by admitting like, hey, I I've gone through some pretty fucked up shit, and
Yeah.
this is gonna be heavy. Brace
hmm
yourselves, you know.
Yeah.
And then, so you have that song, and then it leads into songs like Teenage Cancer, where
hmm
you actually make a pretty profound confession that you had basically made up a terminal illness in your
Yep.
teens just as like a form of I'm not and this is all speculate, just reading into like lyrics and hearing the songs and
hmm
everything. I don't want to, I'm not going to presume to know what you were thinking at the time. I'm just
No, of course, I
based off of
appreciate that.
what I read from the lyrics. It seems like maybe you were challenging yourself with some like attention seeking behavior and stuff
Yeah.
like that when you were younger.
hmm
And I wanted to ask, so can you speak on the therapeutic process of revisiting these very hurtful and harmful moments in your life
hmm
as you're now writing songs about them, and maybe speaking on the closure that we were referring to earlier? If we look at ourselves as stoics, like you want closure externally, but maybe some things that you are looking for with closure internally. Um,
hmm
was there some really defining moments like that for you in the recording process?
Yeah, I think like for a lot of the album, I skirted with coming to terms with like actually addressing and like speaking about in detail like some of the things that I did. And I kind of flirted with that idea because it was really hard for me to actually put pen to paper and write about it because it was, like revisiting this place of trauma that like I don't for my own sake want to spend too much time in all the time. And so like I had trouble throughout the album with like confronting these things rather than just kind of speaking about them in the abstract because a
Yeah.
lot of the earlier songs like that I wrote for the record, like Save Some Love for Me, Sometimes I Get Lonely, Pathological, are kind of just vaguely like, yeah, I did a bad thing. So I think I had to get through those in order to figure out how to actually confront what had happened. And Teenage Cancer is a really interesting track because that was actually the last track I did for the album. It wasn't even supposed to be there because what happened was there was supposed to be a different track and there was supposed to be a featured artist, but at the last moment, that featured artist like pulled out. They texted me, they were like, "Hey, I'm so sorry, but I can't do this verse anymore." And so I was just like, "Oh fuck, I have to write a new song."
Have to do something
Um,
else. Yeah.
and I was like, you know what? I was like, I have to talk about this because this has been something that like people know about it. Like people I went to high school with know I did this thing and they know that it was fucked up. But like other than that, like I've kind of kept it very close to my chest. Like I haven't really talked about it since then. And I just wanted to come out in the open and just say it for my own internal peace of mind. Because like you were mentioning earlier, like closure is a little bit different for everyone. It doesn't necessarily involve forgiveness. That's not a requirement. But for me, closure, I realized that closure for me was going to involve coming out in the open and being like, hey, I did this and it wasn't okay.
Yeah.
And letting people draw their own conclusions from that. And so that song was, it was the last one to be written and it was probably the most difficult song to write on the record because it really forced me to like go through it. And it was really scary to put it out there. But now that I have like a bunch of people have pointed to it as being their favorite song on the record, which I'm very glad to hear.
Yeah.
And I'm just I'm just glad that people can come to terms with it because like that song has also generated quite a bit of discussion over like whether it was my fault, whether it wasn't my fault, and I was just like having a bad coping mechanism to deal with this thing that was out of my control, or like maybe it's somewhere in between. Maybe it was a little bit my fault, maybe it wasn't, maybe it was wrong, maybe it wasn't, and so it's just I'm just glad that people are discussing it and taking it on their own terms because that's really all that I can ask for as an artist.
Sure. Absolutely.
Hmm.
So I've got a couple more questions for you if you don't mind.
Sure.
First one is I'm going to actually speak to the musicality of the record a little bit.
Hmm.
And one of the things that I just found so really profound about Tales of a Failed Altruist was how diversified the music was. I mean, you touched on like it almost seemed like half a dozen different genres, like
Hmm.
you went into hyper pop. There was a rap element, a couple different rap elements. There was
Hmm.
obviously there was a lot of rock, but if you really kind of like break down the rock element to it, like you have like a grunge, you
Hmm.
have alternative, you have some Americana folk stuff as well too. There's really like there's just a very diversified sound to this album. I think in my review, in fact, I cited Childish Gambino's album,
Yes.
the Bando Stone, in how diversified his record was, and
Hmm.
I think that's impressive because not everybody could just go out and perform multiple different genres like that. What was that process like for you? Just being able to kind of visit those different styles of music.
Well, it was always like my musical journey has always been like a little bit of a weird thing because growing up, like my earliest musical inspirations were from my father, who is a huge classic rock guy, right? He's
Sure.
Velvet Underground,
Oh
he's
wow.
Deep Purple, he's Cream, he loves The Who. He's not huge into glam. So then when I discovered Queen and David Bowie and Prince, like I gravitated towards that stuff. I was like, oh, I like this a lot. And so
Yeah.
he kind of didn't really like enjoy that stuff as much as I did. And so like that was the first like split that like we had in terms of musical taste. But like those like classic rock inspirations have always kind of been at the core of what I did. My first concert was Aerosmith. I saw The Cure when I was like 16. That was a great show.
Oh,
And
that's awesome. Yeah.
so I've always wanted to be able to write, rock songs like that. But then the problem that I ran into was like I started writing my first songs like immediately during and like after like my suicidal episode when I was 15. And I couldn't play guitar for shit. Like I was I could play like maybe five chords and I couldn't do it. I couldn't get a good recording of it because like I was recording off of like my shitty USB mic in my closet and it was just like it wasn't
Yeah.
coming out the way I wanted and I just did not have the ability to make that work. And so I was like, all right. But around that time was also when I started discovering hip hop and trap and like R&B. And I started moving electronic, and so most of my first two albums are like alternative R&B inspired and like are much closer to that like sort of trap like modern like pop music
Yeah.
sound. And but then like I realized like coming off of the second album because there was a long period where I didn't write anything because I wasn't sure what I wanted to write about. And then while I was putting the concept for this album together, where I was starting to come to terms with it and be like, okay, no, I want to write an album where I like face my demons and like put all of this out there. And I was like, and I'm also going to learn to play guitar and I'm going to learn to play bass. And so during the process of this album, like I very much wanted to go back and write the songs I've always wanted to write. And so I taught myself how to play guitar. I think like semi decently. I built myself a Telecaster. I built myself a Stratocaster. I built a P bass, and I recorded like most of the songs on the album with those, which was a great experience for me. But then like also I wanted to pay homage to like some of the hyperpop influences that I've drawn from, some of the rap influences that I've drawn from, and a lot of the hyperpop material is used on the album to depict kind of like the younger version of me that appears in certain places, right? Because I felt like that chipmunked, like pitched up vocal aesthetic that I was using to portray the younger me synergized well with hyperpop, and also the
Yeah.
whole hyperpop brand of being maximalist and over the top and in your face kind of feels very similar to how I was trying to be at the time because I was just like constantly making stuff up about myself and trying to be larger than life and really interesting and really popular and trying to be bigger than I was because at the core of who I was, I didn't really believe that people would love me for just being who I was. I felt like there had to be something extra. And so
Yeah.
I was like, all right, the younger me is going to be hyperpop. And so that's kind of where some of the multi-genre influences came from. But it was a journey like putting together this record and figuring out how to mix live instruments and play guitar and like do all these things I didn't know how to do. But at the end of the day, I'm really proud of it. I'm sure like in 10 years I'm going to be way better at guitar and look back at this record and be like, "Oh my God, like this solo's trash or whatever." But like right now I'm very proud of what I was able to create.
I think you absolutely should be. I think the record's great, and I think you'd actually said something before about debating on whether or not you should leave old music up and down or what
Hmm.
own it. As artists, you're gonna go through phases in your life, and you're gonna become a better musician. You're gonna look back
Hmm.
at some of your first work, and you're gonna be like, oh my goodness, what was I doing?
Yeah,
It is all a part of who you are today, though. And so
exactly.
I strongly encourage, like don't ever abandon that old work. Sometimes it's even good to go and revisit it
Hmm.
and maybe like and explore some of those subjects later on in life and everything, and you come up
Yeah.
with a different interpretation of them.
Hmm.
So speaking of, what's next for you? I know you're going to want to promote this album, obviously, and
Yes.
do everything you can to get it out there for people to hear, which they should. But what are some things that maybe you are planning on going about doing that? Like, is there maybe a small tour in mind, or like maybe
Hmm.
at least just traveling, playing some shows outside the city, just to kind of maybe branch out a little bit?
Yeah, so there are a few things in the works right now. We're playing a show on September 26th at Brooklyn Music Kitchen, which is obviously in Brooklyn.
Yep.
And then after that, we are trying to line up a few more shows. We have a contact out in Providence where we might be able to,
Rhode Island.
put some roots down, play a show there. We might be able to do something in Philadelphia, something in Jersey. Like, so there are things in the works. I would love to get out there and play more shows and continue to get on stage and be like, this is who I am.
Yeah.
Um, and so that's something that we're working on. Something that I haven't announced yet that we are also working on is there's a live album in the works. We've recorded
Oh,
like
that's awesome.
3 or 4 of our shows so far, and I'm in the process of mixing and mastering everything. And so there's going to be a live album, which I'm really excited for because I feel like the live album is kind of like it's kind of fallen by the wayside in recent years. I feel like it's not as like popular as it used to be to do that, but I would love to bring part of the experience of seeing us perform live into the homes of listeners who are far away and haven't seen us play yet. So we're working on that. And then on the music side of things, like we were talking a little bit before the interview started about like getting back in the studio and like so there is it's tough cuz every time I put out a project, I go through this period of writer's block where I'm just like, okay, I spent so much time working on music. I don't want to do it for a bit.
Yep.
I don't know what I want
Put
to
it
write
away.
about. I don't know what kind of songs I want to do. And I'm trying very hard not to let that happen this time. I want to keep creating. I want to keep growing. And so like there's a few concepts that I have in mind. Like I would love to do an album where like the entire thing is just collaborations with people. Like I would love to do an album where there's like a featured artist or two or three on every track and there's co-production and stuff cuz I feel like I tend to I tend to like be like, yeah, I want to collaborate with people, but then as the album starts coming together, and that did end up happening with this album, I ended up just being like, oh, but like maybe I should tell this story. Like maybe this is mine, you know? And I would love to be a little bit more collaborative and open with my music. And I also have like a loose concept for like a follow-up record in mind where like I go back and like tell more stories from not just like my teenage years, but like specifically childhood and like some of the things that happens that set up my adolescence to unfold in the way it did and culminate in like the struggles that you hear in this album. And so like there are a few things in mind, nothing concrete as of yet, except for the live album and the shows that we're playing. But I'm really excited for what's next. I think it'll be a good time, and I just hope people stick around and enjoy the ride.
All right, excellent. So that's essentially my last question.
Hmm.
Now I'd like to kind of leave it up for you. Is there anything else that you would like to mention before we sign off here?
Yes, actually. So in addition to producing and writing the songs for most of this record, I also recorded and mixed basically everything. Because in the last couple years, and we spoke about this a little bit before the interview as well, I've been employed as an audio engineer out in New York, and so I am a recording engineer. I work at a studio out here. I also mix and master. And so, like, if anyone that is listening to this interview or reading it has any music that needs doing, like, I would be happy to work on it. If there's anyone who's interested in how I achieved some of the sounds that I did on this record, like, just shoot me a message. I'm happy to talk about it. I want to be like as open as possible because I feel like a lot of people, like a lot of producers, a lot of engineers will kind of gatekeep like their secret sauce and like don't want to share it. I very much don't want to do that. So like I am happy to like spill all of my production secrets. I will tell anyone whatever they want to know about how I did a specific thing. So if anyone who's listening would like that and wants my perspective on things, like everyone is always welcome to reach out to me.
You heard it here. You can get Han's secret sauce, 15 minutes
Secret
of
sauce.
fame. Just let him know.
Hmm.
All right,
Layer
well,
eight.
Han, I just want to thank you so much for coming on and speaking to me about this incredible album, Tales of Failed Altruist. I can't begin to tell you how much I enjoyed listening to it. If you haven't listened to it, of Failed Altruist, it released August 29th. It's 14 songs, 45 minutes of pure bliss. Han, if you happen to be in the New York area, Han mentioned just a moment ago, he is playing a show on September 26th in Brooklyn. Don't want to miss it. Please, please, please follow him on Instagram, follow him on Threads, follow him anywhere you can. Just don't stalk him unless he's into that. You never know.
It's
Um,
all good. It's just
Check
nice
him
to have
out on
fans.
Spotify. Check him out on Apple Music. Make sure that you follow him. He's putting out great music, and you don't want to miss anything. There's a live album that's going to be coming out soon. You don't want to
Hmm.
miss a chance to hear this music and see it live. Han, thank you again so much for being here,
No,
and
I
I
should
wish
be
you the
thanking
best
you.
of luck.
This is great work you're doing on 15 Minutes of Fame and all us independent artists. We really appreciate it. So thank you, and it's great to be here once again.
I appreciate it. I can hardly call it work. All it is me listening to incredible music day after day. So like that,
Hmm.
there's not much work to it, but thank you for that, and I just wish you all the best.
Thank you.
Mhm.